So the topic we'll be discussing today is, as Somalis, is the BLM movement our fight as well? Why do some Somalis consider themselves Arabs and others Africans? For the past weeks, I've noticed that this topic has resurfaced due to recent events and seen several Somalis partake in discussing this across different social media platforms. I look forward to hearing what our panelists' views are today on the subject matter. Panelists will also answer viewers' questions. If you have questions, please comment under the Facebook Live video and we will get to them after our second round. Okay, so Hannah, can I also ask that all panelists put themselves on mute if you're not talking? Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Go on, Hannah.
Yeah, should I start?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Hannah Barale, so I'm from Bristol. I graduated in neuroscience, so I'm doing healthcare sciences at the moment, so that's quite nice. And I don't consider myself to be an activist per se. I feel like it's a big title, but I do dabble in activism sometimes. And with regards to the topic, I thought it was really like up my street because I've been very interested in the Black Lives Matter movement and very in tune with the news. And I think ever since probably Philando Castile and his encounter with the police. So with regards to whether it's relevant to the Somali community, I think we first need to kind of look at the movement as a whole. What is the movement about and what's the mission and the aim and what did they seek to do really? So it's about Black lives. So the most important thing for us to differentiate is what does it mean to be Black? What is race? What do these things actually mean? And why do Somalis sometimes have a tough time putting the two together? So with regards to just the definition of race in general, first of all, it is a social construct. It is something that doesn't necessarily exist as a absolute. It's something that someone invented to kind of, as a form of pseudoscience and a way to kind of make white people seem better than Black people. So where do Somalis fit into that? So by definition, if we're going by this social construct, they would fit into Black. This is just based off of their African heritage and their Black skin, the color of our skin, nothing else. And that's just the two from the very like rudimentary definition. And with regards to that, I think Somalis sometimes have a very tough time dealing with the idea that they're being boxed into the Black category. So that could be for a number of reasons. And the biggest thing is that we are some of the earliest immigrants in the UK. I can speak on the UK perspective. I'm not 100% sure on America or Australia or any of the other regions. So I'd be happy to hear other perspectives. But in the UK, we kind of came in the late 1900s. So Blackness has existed within the construct of a white society. Blackness has been a thing for about 400 years. So we came in quite late into the game. And now suddenly we're Black. Our whole lives we've been Somali. We've all identified as a Somali identifier, but now we're Black. And for Somali people, when they observe how Black people are treated in this country, they don't want any part of that. They think, oh no, we're not like them. Let's differentiate ourselves and let's put us in the category of Somali. I'm not Black, I'm Somali. And if you look at Nigerian communities or Nigerian immigrants and Sierra Leone and anybody from West Africa in general who are not who are not born in Britain, for example, and they're from Nigeria and all these other regions, they'll say the exact same thing. They'll be like, no, but I'm not Black, I'm Nigerian. So I understand, even I ask my parents and my people who are around me the same question, like, would you identify yourself as Black? And they're like, no, not at all. I don't identify with that struggle. But needless to say, it's still relevant to us. And it's because if you look at the way Black people are treated in the UK, in education and in policing, if you look at the statistical breakdowns, those numbers are mimicking similarly to the way that the Somalis are treated. I'll go into detail maybe later as the discussion goes on, but actually just as the introductory kind of statement, I would say that it's very relevant to us. And it's something that we're not doing ourselves any favors by trying to distance ourselves from the Black Lives Matter movement or Black issues, because unfortunately, as long as we're in this country as a minority group in a majority white society who is kind of labeled us as Black, then it is what it is. Then yeah, it is relevant to us. But yeah, that's just my opening statement.
Thank you, Hannah. And next to go, it is Mohammed Mahmoud.
Okay, I was waiting for you to say his name. I was like, yeah. So my name is Mohammed Mahmoud. Some of you know me. But for those who don't, I created a platform called Somali Sideways. It's been going on for about 6 years now. And I used to work at the Ministry of Justice in the UK for 2.5 years. And I decided to just quit and on my own journey. And I'm currently in Nairobi since December 2019. I'm doing a few assignments here. I haven't been doing as much since Ramadan. So I published 2 books, one in February 2018 and the other in February of this year. Inshallah, I'm looking to hopefully travel once Corona is. But yeah, that's enough about me. So are Somalis black, and should they take part in the Islam movement? The simple answer is yes, simply because we're predominantly Muslim population, and in the religion it teaches us that if injustice is taking place, we should speak up and speak out and voice our opinion on it. As Muslims, that's our role, and that's what we should be doing anyway. As Somalis who are majority Muslim, just based on that, you should take part in the fight. And on top of that, I feel like there's this misconception of blackness, especially with the Somali community. And to be honest, this has been going on for a long time now. Black is seen as being evil, white being pure, even through colonialism. And during that time, whites will come into places in Africa and claim that Africans are barbaric individuals. They don't know how to run their homeland. We need to come in and take control and teach them how it's supposed to be done. And through that, even when it came to slavery, the white individual Christianity as a way of saying that we are much more superior to you. They use the concept of Jesus as white, and all these other things. So it stems through a whole thing. Like, it's not just Somalis, but it's been going on for so many years. And with regards to with blackness, Somalis don't associate themselves with it because they view as there's this concept of Jarer as a derogatory term, and they say a Jarer individual is someone who has a flat nose, someone who doesn't have soft hair, someone who's like black and things like that. In how Somalis view it is very negative. They're like, I don't associate myself with that because my hair is soft, my nose is not flat, and things like that, And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't associate ourselves with it, because there's a negative connotation to blackness. And to simply put the Arab perspective, obviously I'll dwell into that more, but to talk about the Arab perspective, no, we're not Arabs, and I don't understand till this day why Somalis say, or the ones that do, they say that they are. And I think it's because the ones that are from the north, Somaliland, for example, like there were those that are Yemen or certain other Arab countries, they would come to Somaliland, whether it's for trade, whether it's for marrying those that are in Somaliland or vice versa, or anything like that. And just because there's been some relation with Arabs doesn't necessarily mean we're Arab. I'm born and raised in London. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm like English people are white. It doesn't make sense. And of course, like with regards to the Arab League, how Somali, the country itself, part of the Arab League, doesn't make sense to me at all. And Palestine after Somalia. I don't know if you guys look into it, but I was looking at the date. Somalia joined before Palestine, which doesn't make sense to me at all. Our national language is not Arabic, Somali. There's there's so many reasons why we're not Arab and we're not from Arab people. You know, the Arab individual, those who beg to be Arab, they don't even have citizenship of country. You know, there are so many people I know that are in Arab countries that have been there for so many years, but they don't have Shari. You know, they don't have a piece of paper. They even travel and they've been in that country for so many years. Claim to be Arab if you don't even have a specific travel document to travel the world and see the world. And I think education is a big factor. People need to educate, need to know their history, people need to know their heritage, their language, their culture. And I think if people were to understand and know about their history and seek it, we'll be in a different world.
Thank you, Mohammed. Next, we've got Mukhtar Sharif.
Assalamu alaikum. How's everyone doing? Am I sounding all right?
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Mukhtar Sharif. I live in Seattle, Washington. Give me 1 second, actually. I'm at a hotel and they just knocked on my door. Sorry. All right, sorry. So I live in Seattle, Washington. By profession, I'm a software engineer. I work in the tech industry. She's still knocking, bro. I'm really sorry. Yeah, so I work in the tech industry. I do a podcast called Nomadic Hustle. We do professional networking events in the US and Canada. So that's a little bit about me. On this topic, I'm not an expert. So I'm not going to be really talking about kind of studies or giving too much historical context, but mostly it'll be about my experience living in the United States. And as a Black man, I think Somalis, I think we just discovered we were Black. I think this last 2 weeks, we are finally going to check off Black in the census and other. I mean, to be honest, my whole life I've kind of been, I mean, when I was younger, I used to check off other and actually write in Somali, just because I think a lot of us in America, at least, we were resettled in the poorest neighborhoods, right? So what happens is you get to these neighborhoods and the first impression that a lot of Somali parents have of the African American community is, you know, in poverty, you have crime, you have issues of drugs and violence and all of these things happening. And they begin to attribute those things to the African American community. When in fact, if it was white people, if just the people were changed and the environment stayed the same, and that it was poor whites in a community of no resources, of rampant crime and police brutality, you'd get the same result. So the color of the skin of the people in that situation doesn't really matter. But nonetheless, Somalis just came and then they were like, if these are African Americans, then we're not African American, right? We're not Black, we're Somali, because everything that they kind of have been told and that they've been seen of the Black community in the African American community is literally what they've been fed by the media and by education and by white people who brought them to this country. So in the beginning, it was a lot of resistance to being labeled as Black, to being seen as even African American. And so many Somali people would be quick to correct someone who calls them Black. And then 2020 happens, right? We get to 2020, and I think this is the moment, especially here in America, that I think a lot of people are beginning to accept, you know, being Black as Somalis. And I think for a lot of young men like myself growing up in America, there was never an instance where somebody did not discriminate against me because they realized I was Somali, right? Like any instances of discrimination, like, I mean, we face the exact same challenge as Black men in America, quote unquote, you know, non-Somali Black men, right? Police brutality, you know, profiled. I mean, how many times have I been pulled over for no reason? I mean, I've been pulled over where I wasn't even the driver. My white friend was driving. And a cop came to my side to ask me for my license. I'm like, I'm not even driving. Why are you asking me for my information, right? So as growing up as a young Somali man in the US, whether or not you identify as a Black person, you are a Black person. and you've been treated like a Black person in America. And the white officer who's arresting you and who's gonna beat you while you're on the ground handcuffed does not care that you're, come from a tribe in the coast of Somalia. None of that matters, right? So I think it's for the longest time, that resistance to, being Black in America has kind of prevented the Somali community from taking part in these causes, because they felt like it wasn't their battle, right? They felt like it wasn't their cause, and they just didn't realize that these communities and the establishment and these systems don't care that you're a Somali American or Somali Canadian, or your parents came from Somalia. And that's kind of, I think, set us back, right? It took us forever. I think 2020 will be the year that wholeheartedly most Somali communities across the globe will partake in the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And kind of social justice. Before now, it was only for the woke people, right? It was only a group of people that were seen as kind of like, they're, they don't know who they are, who are they? And historically, congrats to anybody who isn't joining the bandwagon right now. Some people who've been woke for a long time. You guys have been historically proven right. So, to answer, long story short, are Somalis Black? Yes. I don't know if that's even a question. And especially if you live, I can't speak on the UK, but if you live in America, and for this, even if you look at Somali women, right? Somali women have always been visibly different, right? Visibly different, as if they wear their hijab, they automatically, you have multiple layers of, systems that want to oppress you or discriminate against you. And for the Somali men, we've been kind of just blending into society, right? So finally that, we're dealing with these issues now, they're forefront. And I think it's time to tackle them. I think the conversation should no longer be, are Somalis Black? The conversation should be, how do we defeat oppression? Even let's just say we weren't dark-skinned Africans, right? Let's say Somalis came from some Arab country and came to the United States. The Black Lives Matter movement should still be important to us, right? Fighting for justice is not a Somali issue. It's not a Arab issue, right? It's about humanity. And at the same time, we're Muslims. Islam calls for justice, no matter who the injustice is being done upon, even if it's upon yourself or your family, or if you're the oppressor. At every instance, we should be supporting the person who's being oppressed. So not only are we Black, I think we need to start fighting for other people's rights, fighting for our rights, and being on the right side of history.
Thank you, Mukhtar. Sago?
Hey guys, I'm Sago Wasame, and I basically work in the refugee sector and advocating for refugees in the UK on the rights and entitlement. I've got postgraduate violence, conflict and development, and my dissertation was essentially focused on anti-Blackness and racism in Libya when I did looking at the EU's migration policies on first countries, and that's something that I mainly focus on. So I think for me, I'm not an expert in it at all, but I think it's something that I really care about, and I feel like
my experience as a young Black woman has, I think my earphones might have stopped there for a minute.
It works much better without the earphones.
Okay, perfect. I think my experience as a young Black woman in the UK, in the north of England, I think has shaped the guide to like my career, and I feel like my experience as a young Black woman, because I identify as that, does not differ from any other Black ethnic group in the UK. So I think this is our struggle. I feel like the Black Lives Movement is our struggle, has always been our struggle, and moving forward it will be our struggle. So I really feel like this is something that I'm really happy that we're having this discussion, because I feel like this debate that we have right now actually is an example that anti-Blackness is really prevalent in the Somali community. And I think this is something that we need to dissect and actually, really discuss now, because I think moving forward, I think I want us to move forward so we're able to actually just go forward with that and join with the Black Lives Movement, as we're doing now, especially in Minnesota and in London, which I'm really proud of and I really am happy about. What else was my other points I was going to say? yeah, I was gonna just, that's really what I really wanted to discuss, and thank you guys. Oh, I don't think I can hear you, Amina.
Oh no, sorry, don't mind me, continue.
Oh yeah, I was just talking about, mine was really simple and short, but yeah, it's a topic that I really care about, so thank you for inviting me and asking me to be here.
Thank you, Sagal. Sada?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm Sada Chirte, I'm Director of Black Southwest Network, which is an organization working for racial justice. I've been with the organization for 10 years. It is Black Southwest Network. So do I think in terms of the question? Absolutely. I've had the privilege of working in the racial justice space for the last 10 years. But I also understand the conversation within the Somali community around are we Black, and coming to England, perhaps being African born, you don't realize that, and race is not an issue, and really it should be an issue, and you don't see yourself as Black because you're Somali, you have a clan, you have an identity, and you exist in that space. Fast forward, and then you come to the Western country, and it's completely different. You become racialized. And that racialized element of it, I think Mukhtar has clearly articulated that really, really well, is you become Black and you don't have an identity. It's quite hard to just be Black because you have an identity, you're somebody and you've grown up with that, and to really lose that is a challenge. However, in the broader sense, what does it mean being Black in the West? I think it is more around systemic racism. And the system doesn't really care whether you're Somali, whether you're African, whatever you are, your interaction with the system as a non-white person is automatically Black. And what does that produce? Then it produces the negative outcomes that we talk about, whether it's in education, whether it's in criminal justice, your everyday interaction is around that. And that's pretty much based on a system where race is a social construct, and we all know that. You don't have a gene for Black people, for white people, it doesn't really exist, but it's a social construct really based on an exploitative system of exploiting people and dehumanizing people. And we can go back to slavery, we can go back to colonialism, and we can go back, even now, we can see that in terms of racial inequality. So it doesn't matter how qualified you are or how intelligent you are, but every interaction that you are, it comes with a perception which race and Black as a classification means you're less, and that means privilege and advantaging white people to really exist in the Western society. So it is a big conversation, but I think from the Somali community, it's more around education and understanding that struggle. And I think it's something that we need to be more educated about, because we're missing out. Not being part of that is the reason why we don't understand why our kids are getting the outcomes that they have, why they're not progressing. So being part of the West, we need to be more educated about it, and to be part of that movement to really challenge and fight for racial justice, because it has an impact on all of us. The system doesn't really care or doesn't understand Somaliness, whether you're from North, whether you're from, it doesn't really matter. And I think we need to be more sophisticated in understanding that as a community. In the UK, I think when you look at data, Somali community is the weakest, whether it's in education, whether it's in employment, and that's the absolute brutal truth. But we're not really engaged with that. Our daily conversation is being, we're talking about clans, we're in Somaliland, we're in Somalia, and we're caught up in that conversation. And I think we need to have a really intelligent conversation to really understand how systemic racism operates, our part in that, and what we need to do to really begin to change outcomes for ourselves and the next generation. And if you're not part of the movement, then we'll really be missing out, because it is fundamentally, you have to, if you're in the West, but also in the African context, why is Africa where is that? It's the same conversation around racial justice comes into fore, but I leave that to the discussion later, but absolutely.
Thank you, Sada. Last but not least, Yusuf.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yusuf. I'm calling from Hargeisa. I was born and raised in the UAE. I think I'm the least person here who got into or felt racism because most of you guys are living in the West, so I'm not the most qualified person to talk about it. But the question was, are we black? I think, yeah, by the color of our skin, it's clear that we are black. And it's a blessing thing to have, alhamdulillah. And being last, I think Mukhtar and Sado said it all. Being the last one is easy because everyone said your points already. But it's all about the system doesn't see you as Somali. They see white, and whatever is rest, they are just the non-whites. That includes blacks, Asians, and other minorities. So unless we are part of this movement, unless we contribute, I think we'll be left behind, because this injustice will catch you off guard one day. One day, some white cop or white dude will treat you unfairly, whether it's at your job, whether it's on your neighborhood, and saying that we're not black, this is not our business. This is something, I think maybe it's because our parents, they don't want to associate themselves or their kids with the African American or African community in the West in general, due, as to Mukhtar said, some of them are associated with drugs and crime, etc. So they think Somalis are a different race altogether, but we're not, we're black. We will be affected by whatever injustice everyone is facing. So unless we participate, unless we join this movement now, we'll be left behind. So that's what I have to say now.
Thank you, Yusuf. Just a quick question to you. You said you were born in Arabta, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so what being black in Arabta, how was that? Were you treated any different, do you feel like, or did you face any racism?
If I'm being honest, yes, there is racism in Arabta in general, especially in the Gulf area. Some countries more than the other, but it's not even close to what you guys are facing in the UK or on the States. Some people would, because in Arabta you have those Baladka, those people from the Gulf itself, and you have others like Sudanese, Palestinians, Egyptians, etc. So with the other people, with other races, we're fine. But sometimes you will have some injustice here and there, and people calling you black or degrading you. But it's not as common as what's happening in the West. So it's there, but it's not very common. It's not, people are not talking about it as it's happening over there. So it is there, but it's not a serious thing. I think not now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. Thank you. So we're just going to go into our second round now. So you'll all have the opportunity to speak for up to 3 to 5 minutes. You can comment on anything that any other panelists have said. Does anyone want to go first?
I'll go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just while it's still fresh in our minds. And let's make this a little interesting. Our brother Yusuf has said that he hasn't seen much racism in Arabta. It's not as bad as it is in the West. And I would actually argue that it's worse in Arab countries than it is in the West. It is not even close. I mean, you live in the UAE. I've been to the UAE before. I think the UAE is in the 1920s with regards to its treatments of non-Arabs. I mean, when you look at the United States, I mean, they accept anyone from across the world, right? I mean, put its injustices aside for a second. They still recognize people as a citizen of the United States. They give rights to people who work in this country, as racist and as discriminatory as its systems might be. I mean, you have to give credit where credit is due. They do have some freedoms in this country that are afforded to Black people. Whereas, and I think the racism in the Arab world, specifically in the Gulf countries, is actually more. I mean, they're not. I mean, there's police brutality killing, Somali men in Abu Dhabi. I don't think that's what they're doing, but it's normalized to the point where, I mean, somebody will just pull up and leave their car in the middle of the road, and you can't talk to him because he's from that country, right? You can't say a word to this man. He will come and verbally abuse you in your own business, and you can't say a word to him because they're going to deport you, right? Or a teacher will come and say something, or an administrator will say something and embarrass you in front of everyone, disrespect you in front of your family, and you aren't able to say anything. In the United States, you can say something. There is no threat of deportation, right? There's no threat of being locked up for your views, as crazy as your views might be, for the most part. So to make this a little interesting, I think that you said you weren't experiencing it to the extent of racism in the United States. I'd argue that it's worse. It's just probably how we've become accustomed to it, just because it's normal to us. Right now, it's normal for a Somali person to go to the UAE and to go to Saudi Arabia and to be abused. That's normal, right? So because it's normal does not make it okay. Because it's normalized, because Somalia is in the state that it's in, because we haven't had a central government in 30 years, that does not make it okay for Somali citizens to be treated that way in those Arab countries, right? So I just want to kind of point that out, that racism does exist in those Arab countries, and I think it's actually worse than it is in the United States of America.
I would totally agree with you on that part. My point was racism because because the topic was about being Black. I wouldn't say I felt racism due to the fact that I am a Black person. Yes, you are right. There's a high level of racism in the system because they feel they are like the white dudes. They are superior to the other nations. They, once you have money, you have become a very successful country. You look down to the rest of the other nations, although they are the ones who built your country from ground. These guys used to have nothing, absolutely nothing, till 1971, I would say. So at that moment, everything flourished for them. Yes, as you rightfully said, these people they just don't care about who you are, what you do, as long as you're not an Emirati or a Saudi or a Kuwaiti or a Bahraini or whatever, you are below us. I can't generalize, but I would say most of them are like that. But you won't face racism due to the fact that you are Black. Like, for example, if you are minding your own business, you won't find someone who is going to attack you or abuse you just because you're Black. As you said, I understand, it's becoming a normal thing that you can't speak back to that person, but the police there, they are quite fair.
Yusuf,
as long, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to ask you a quick question.
Oh, I thought I was mute and I was talking. Okay.
No. I just want to ask you a quick question. You said the racism or the treatment that most people face is not due to their skin color. You said it's more due to the fact that they're not UAE or Kuwaiti or this, and they see you as below. Now, yes, that would suggest that they would also treat white people like that. And do you feel like they treat white people like that? Because white people are not Black, and what I'm trying to say is, I would think they would kind of raise white people up, and that way it would kind of suggest that they are actually looking down at people because they're Black. Or what do you think?
I think, I don't know, but usually white people have a certain privilege wherever they go, not only in the Arab countries, like in any country in Africa, in any country in Asia. The moment that you are a white person, like from Europe or whatever, you have a certain privilege. It's the case also in the Arab countries, but I would say they won't face racism, but they would still try to distance them out of their business. Like they won't be degraded, if that's what you're asking. They will have a certain. They would be below the Arabta, but not as below as Africans or Asians or people from other countries. So they will face it, but to a lesser extent. I forgot my point. My goodness. Yeah, sorry. So Mukhtar Warunta, you're right. But the thing is, I was talking to my experience in the UAE 20 years ago. Racism was minimum. Like you won't face any racism whatsoever, even if you are Somali, even if you are Egyptians or whatever. But in the recent years, due to change in their system, like they started throwing people out of the country, jailing them, terminating their contracts. So it's a systematic thing, but it's not as horrible. There's no police brutality. There's no someone won't attack you or hurt you only because you're black. It's just that they might degrade you, but they won't attack you, as we can see in the UK or on the States. So I would slightly disagree with Mukhtar. There is racism. It's in the system, yes, but you won't get hurt physically. You won't get abused as people are being abused in the States nowadays.
I'm just going to quickly jump in because I feel like, thank you for your point. I would say I've been to Doha. I've flown every time I've gone to Somalia. I've flown through that, and I actually actively made the decision not to fly through there anymore again. Through Dubai, through Doha, through the UAE, because the experience that I've had myself as a Black British person was for me was just like completely like obvious racism. And for me, I've made the active choice. But I feel like also, I want to just quickly disagree with you there, because I do feel like the racism there is quite obvious, but I feel like they have a system specifically with the kafala system that allows, it protects, especially, a lot of, it protects people and enables it enables violence, direct violence towards especially migrant workers. And I think it's built on a racist system that allows that blatant violence that we've all seen probably on Twitter and the videos of, migrant workers from, Ethiopia or from different parts of Africa, or even through places like Thailand and stuff, for what they're from there as well. So I feel like I have to disagree with you. I feel like there's a system that completely allows that and actually gives them a platform to do so, because they have that power where they can take people's citizenship. And essentially, I think the kafala system is, and it allows people to, it essentially has ownership on these workers. They have no rights, and their rights are essentially stripped away from them, and it's placed on the responsibility of their employer. So I have to disagree with you there.
Sagal, are you referring to, for instance, the African maids, for instance, that are...
Yeah, I've seen the videos of that, but I'm not saying it's just exclusive to them. What I'm talking about is the kafala system where, migrant workers will come and do, labor work, and then essentially their rights and entitlements are attached to their employer, and their passport, everything is attached to that. I'm not going to probably explain it as well, but like that is what essentially the kafala system is, and I think that's given in a platform where they've been able to violently, take away people's rights, human rights, and do it so blatantly and still be able to get away with it because of that system. So I do have to disagree with you there. I just feel, yeah, I guess so. I think I made my point.
I think sometimes, the challenge around racism is, yes, the West, I guess if you look to the West and you might say it's really, really bad. But I think there's a history there of civil rights. You have a history fighting for rights. So people have rights and people are demanding something different, and people can vocalize things. So that's totally is a different context compared to Arab countries. I think the challenge, that doesn't even exist. So it is way, way, way behind. You don't have any rights. And I think racism can happen to you without even knowing somebody's being racist. You can internalize to a place where you don't have a voice and you just accept even the worst thing happening to you, but you really appreciate being in that country and just having a job. That is the most important thing. So education, rights, different elements perhaps play how we feel and how we understand racism. Another challenge is, and I can't comment too much around Middle Eastern countries because I haven't lived there, but I think there's something also being Muslim that because of that and trying to identify significantly with being Arab as Somalis, we perhaps don't see much and we accept much. And that's a big, big issue. But even if you come to the African context, we also have another challenge around how perhaps if it's colonialism, whiteness, oppression, all of those things, and our sense of who we are, even as Africans or Black people. So if you go to, for example, East Africa, and you will see how white people are treated and other Africans or Black people are treated. So we have a lot of issues around really understanding who we are in this wider context, and that comes from a very, very long history of colonialism, empire, slavery, all of those things. And you can see when I go back and I'm in a queue at the airport, you'll find a white person being allowed to pass before me. And we question that. And this is questioning a Black person. And I remember once I was in the airport in Kenya and it was happening and I had to speak up. And I said, well, why is the white person being allowed to actually go before myself? And I was being held back. And this woman looked at me and I had to really, really challenge her and to say to her, I get this in the West and this is my everyday where you see all of those things. So as a Black person, where do I belong when I come back to Africa and I get the same treatment? And she really looked at me and said, but you're not Black. So we don't even understand ourselves how race, racial inequality, all of those things play out. So I think there's still a significant discussion to really be had, not just from the West, but also from an African perspective and how that plays out. And you can see that in international development. You can see the exploitation. You can see the role of China. So it's a big, big discussion that we need to be more open about because I think we've maintained our conversation around individual identity without understanding the bigger context.
I'm just going to quickly jump on the point that you've made about, like your Blackness and being questioned. I think that's something that I really struggled with, especially being from the north of England. Especially in my youth, my Blackness was constantly questioned by other Black African groups as well. And I think that, I'm not going to make the assumption, but that could be maybe, I feel like other Somalis may have experienced that, especially growing up in the UK, especially in the early 90s. But I think I'm just going to make this quick assumption that I feel we've kind of, I've always growing up, always just identified with being Somali. And this has been my own journey, coming back to my Blackness and being able to identify as that. And I think we have as a community, I think there's anti-Blackness within our community anyways, but I think we've kind of pushed towards just identifying as Somali. And that comes from also the fact that our Blackness has been questioned by other groups as well. But I just feel for us, I feel like we need to move forward and have these discussions and start dissecting that and, move forward to the struggle, the Black struggle and the Black Lives Movement struggle, and move forward with that, because essentially we're having these discussions with ourselves and where our Blackness is constantly always being questioned. And I think, as Muqtaz mentioned before, and some of the people have mentioned, we are not, to the white man, we're not, they don't discriminate. They're not going to, identify and like, oh, these people are Somali. We're still going to get that same experience. But that's something I've definitely struggled with in regards to my Blackness and constantly being questioned. But I think it's a journey that I've had to take and, goes towards, towards that, I guess.
If I can jump on from what Sagal was saying, 100%. I had the same exact situation of kind of coming into understanding that I am Black as well. Because our whole entire life, we've been taught otherwise. Like, even like as Somalis, we've all grown up and be like, oh no, we're not like them. We're not like them, so we can't be Black. But what's a shame really is that we've also been taught we're very ignorant around what Blackness even means. Like, what does it mean to be Black as a person? It's such a big amount of history. You're talking about not just even the transatlantic slave trade, you're talking about colonialism as well. And you're talking about other African nations and societies who are also I didn't even know until recently, but there's indigenous Black people who live in areas in Bangladesh and Pakistan as well. I had no idea. Like, there's so much around that encompasses a Black identity that we've never been taught. We've been completely isolated from that part of history. And understanding that Somali history and how Somalia came to be is very much Somali history, but it's also Black history. The same with how Nigeria came to be and Sierra Leone and those individual countries, that is still part of Black history. And one thing that I think is a shame is that there's been, like, I think one of the panelists mentioned, maybe it was Mukhtar, maybe it was Yusuf, who has stated that there is also a negative connotation around Blackness, especially in the UK. I can speak on the UK very easily. Like I said earlier in the introduction, I think with a lot of our Somali parents and our uncles and our elders, what they observe is negativity with Blackness. So they don't want any proximity with it. So they're like, well, that's just, I don't want to be involved in that, because if I get involved in that, I might become part of that, without actually even realizing we're already a part of it. It's too late. If you look at, for example, policing in our communities, if you look at the policing or like prison populations, there isn't a lot of data, which is a shame, actually. I do think there needs to be more research around how much the Somali kind of population is presented in the policing system, in education and in healthcare, because I think that's valuable, because it's also very educational for our community to understand that if you match our values with other Black ethnic groups within the UK, you'll find that it's very similar. Like, so I was able to find a couple of things here and there from the Lambeth educational report on Somali attainment. So Somali educational attainment was a target that was focused around year 2000, because they realized that they were significantly underachieving. So that came from, one of the biggest reasons that they flashed that up was because of a language barrier. So because we're the later immigrants who came during the late 1900s, we had a language gap per se. I don't know how much I believe that, because if I'm not mistaken, the Asian community also have a language gap, but they're significantly overachieving to the Black community as a whole. So I don't know how much language plays a game, but anyway, from the statistics, as you can see, there's generally speaking in Key Stage 1, when they started reporting from the year 2014, so 2004, 2014, so a 10-year kind of observation in the Lambeth community of Somali students, they found that over the years, as the decade progressed, they got better in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So they started to match the national average a little bit more, still significantly below white people, and exactly almost identically matching Caribbean communities and other African and Black communities. So, and this has been 10 years later. So surely within those 10 years time, when people have been born into the education system, they now speak English, right? So why are we still seeing this disparity? Why is that still a thing? Why is that still happening? Because of racism. Racism is still very much a part of how we're being treated in this country as a people. The more that we stay away from that word, the concept of racism and how that relates to Black people and Blackness and us as Somalis, we're not doing ourselves any favors at all. Whereas it's not, our struggles are not separate. They're not different. There are uniquenesses, and there are also factors and kind of that we need to factor in as well. But racism is still very much a very important point. And I'm kind of at that point where I'm like, we need to, like Mukhtar said, we need to get past this concept of us not being Black or not being part of this community. It's too late. We are. Like we're overrepresented in the prison systems. I think it was something along the, I couldn't find a specific statistic, but in some prison systems in Hounslow, Somalis were disproportionately overrepresented. How does that happen? How does that happen? I think even in saying that Black people in general were overrepresented, our statistics match perfectly with how Black people are being treated in the UK. Is this not racism? Like at this point, like I don't understand why as a community we can't seem to come together on the fact that Black issues are our issues. We need to get past this. And for 2020, it's been a very difficult year, I think, but at the same time, it's been really enlightening, I think, for everybody across the board. When they saw a Somali boy or a group of Somali kids being profiled by a white man in their own building saying, you don't belong here, you don't belong here. All of a sudden, oh, whoa. I think we niggers. Like, I don't understand why. Needless to say, I'm glad we finally had this reawakening, but I want us to now move forward as a community and start to really address things for what it is. We are Black, and we need to also address what that comes with and how we are, disadvantaged as a result of that. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
I'm just going to quickly just ramble on and quickly say something, and I totally agree with what you've just said. I just feel like, aside from the Black Lives Matter movement, I feel like we need to start challenging and holding each other accountable and responsible for even the simple things with our language and the way we interact with the other, you know, Black communities, aside even in the UK or America, and how we can start integrating and challenging ourselves in the way we think. And I've generally got some unlearning to do myself as well, and I feel like we should start doing that within our smaller communities, even with our friends, our families. And I think this is a great way to start, but I think we need to start looking, even at the simpler things. And I'm going to stop now, guys.
I'll add one more thing, maybe just a second. I think a lot of Somali people fear that identifying as a Black person means they can no longer be Somali, right? So does that mean shedding your Somali identity, your culture, your heritage, your background? You know what I mean? So I think that's also a conversation that needs to happen, maybe education around, you know, what it means to be Black, and what that actually is, right? Hanan was talking about that a little earlier, that it's not that you have to choose, right? You have to choose, or that if you want to be Black, that means you somehow don't want to be Somali anymore, right? So I think that's also one of the fears that a lot of people in the diaspora community have, that they're leaving behind their culture.
Can I just, and I think that's a really important point, and I think it's key to hold on to the Somali identity. So one of the things that we're trying to do in the UK, you have BAME. So anything that is non-white is Black, Asian, minority, ethnic in one thing. So one of the fights back is dropping that title and actually allowing people to have their individual identities and desegregating data. And that's quite powerful, because if you have desegregated data, then you can begin to understand racial disparity and who is being hit the most. We're not doing that in the UK. So in the UK, we just have BAME. Anything that is non-white just becomes this. Now, the notion of having an identity and being Somali or Nigerian or whatever that is, it's really, really powerful. I think the bigger identity is more around addressing systemic racism. It is political Black and fighting back, but holding your own identity is fundamentally important, because losing that then means you're losing who you are, and you're actually defining yourself by how other people are defining you. So there's a pushback on that. But I think understanding Black from a political sense around systemic racism, but still holding the individual identities, it's okay for the community. That is not a bad thing. That is a good thing, because you don't want to lose that. But I think just understanding Black from a political perspective in terms of addressing systemic racism, it's what makes it quite fundamental in the West.
Thank you, Sada. Mohammed? We've not heard from you in a while. Are you still with us?
Yeah, sorry. No, I've been listening to everyone's points. It's very valid. Everyone mentioned points that was in my head. So.
Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to ask you, because we've really dived into the first part of the question, which is the BLM Black Lives Matter movement our fight as well? And you've all, you know, agreed across the board that it is. But the second part of the question, why do Somalis consider themselves Arabs and others Africans? I'd love to hear from all of you why you think some are very strong believers that we're meant to be, that we're Arabs and not Africans.
Can I go? And I'll be quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it stems from colonialism. And I think we have an identity crisis, what it means to be African, and hating your African identity and trying to align yourself next to whiteness, which is Arab, comes up. So there's that whole thing of hating to be African, but why would you hate to be African? It is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. Why do you want to try to be something else? So it is really understanding the history of colonialism and what that did to Africans themselves. And the notion about African identity is perceived as negative, and we've internalized that, and we have a problem with that. So we're trying to run away from that by trying to associate ourselves and making ourselves to be something that we're not, so that you can see another person. And that is the thing about oppression. When you've been oppressed, you want to see yourself as free, but you want to oppress the next person. So if I'm Arab, then the next African is worse than me. So I think there's something psychology of colonialism that perhaps is still playing out in our own identity. That's why we're slightly confused and struggling with it. That's my observation. I'm not a historian, but that's just what I think.
I'd like to also add on to that. From my own perspective and from what I've noticed growing up in the UK, I can only speak for the UK at the end of the day, but I do think, or like just generally from my observations, I think a lot of it's got to do with being Muslim and also our geographical location and how close we are to the Arabic kind of countries as a whole. And we've dealt with them a lot throughout history. So we've been in close proximity with them. We've mingled together. We've been around each other a lot longer, historically speaking, than we have now dealing with when we were in the West. We've been in two different social constructs and two different social contexts. So in the UK, we're kind of trapped into this, into the social construct of race as being Black and white and Asian and whatever that is. And we had to we very much, as a community as a whole, we're still very much learning how to deal with what that identity means for us as a people. Whereas when we were back in Somalia, obviously Somalia is a homogenous society. Blackness doesn't exist. You're Somali. You're very much identified with your tribe or, where you come from, your family, that sort of thing. And we've had historical dealings with Arabic countries for a very long time in political allegiances, and hence why we're part of the Arab League, which, I got my own problems with that. But, and I think that's why we create a proximity with what we are closest to, what we're familiar with, and also being Muslim as well. Even though I think it's a shame, because if you look at Islam has taken has a very long history in Africa as a whole. And amongst Black people, we just don't know that. The identity of Islam is very much Arab. So I think it's just us trying to align ourselves with familiarity and what we know. Whereas I think if you look at other Black communities, I think there's a less kind of familiarity between the two that we understand as a whole. And I think it takes a lot of communication, willingness to learn, and kind of a lot of, I guess, deconstructing and decolonizing the way that we understand Blackness, our identity, and how we exist in the Western world. Because we're not, at this point in time, we're not going anywhere. We're still going to be here for a long time. So we're going to have to find a way to deal with kind of our Blackness, but also kind of understanding that we aren't Arab. No matter how hard we try, no matter how much we pray on it, no matter how long that we sit here thinking, I'm Arab, it's not going to happen. It really isn't. So, and Arabs don't look at us as Arab either. No matter how much, even if from our political allegiances or whatever else, whatever have you, it's never gonna happen. So I think we're just gonna have to wake up and smell the roses and identify with and kind of go with what we have now as a people and move forward from there. I think is really important.
I'll add a second to that conversation. I don't want to repeat what Xaajood was saying, that your proximity to whiteness, right? Some other people feel that the closer that you are to white, which is Arab, it wasn't white European, because we know Somalis historically are not fond of the white man, right? It's just, it's not really proximity to whiteness in that, you're more European, but as close as you are to Arab. And that I think was, yes, some part of it is due to colonialism, but also I think love for the religion. Somalis are deeply religious people. And historically, they see Arabs as the closest to the religion, where the deen came from. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ being an Arab man. And I think there's two extremes here, right? There's an extreme where there's an extreme amount of love for Arabs because of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which is not okay because they're people. They're no better as an Arab. Prophet ﷺ himself said that no Arab is better than a non-Arab, right? So there is no special status for Arabs within Islam, right? That doesn't exist. And then there's the other extreme where this conversation, and I've seen it within the Somali community diaspora, is this conversation is used to kind of attack Islam, right? Because what happens is you become so anti-Arab, and a lot of people kind of join this bandwagon to use it as like a, an attack on the religion, to kind of question, the Prophet Muhammad himself, and question the beliefs that the Muslims have, when that isn't also the conversation. So those two extremes exist. And I think part of it also is because of, like I think Hanan was saying, that we don't know about the history of Africa and the Muslim history of Africa, the Islamic history of Africa. A lot of people don't know that Islam reached East Africa before it reached Medina, right? There are Muslims living and thriving, right, historically in our country at that time. And I think we don't really know that history. So we latch on to what we believe is like the Islamic identity. And what is Islamic history? When Islamic history is Somalia, Islamic history is Africa, Islamic history is us and our ancestors. It's not specifically Yemen, Syria, Palestine, and these other countries, right? So I just think that it's a matter of education, that we need to be proud of our heritage, that being Arab doesn't make you closer to the religion, right? And I think in the West that a lot of the mosques, right, we have to start having these conversations about racism within the Muslim community, right? So when you go to a mosque as a Black person, they see you as not really fully Muslim. Like there is a little bit, like there's a little piece missing. And then on the flip side, us as Somalis and as Black people in America specifically, we tend to kind of, view like an Arab sheikh as being more knowledgeable, more religious, more scholarly, and it has no basis, right? So I think there's a lot of things that we have to unlearn in that aspect, and that's just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Mukhtar. Anyone else want to jump in on that? So the question that asked.
Yeah. So.
Go on, Mohammed.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just like what the others have talked about. A lot of people don't know about the story of Mansa Musa. This is a Muslim brother who was from Mali. He had the wealth. He's arguably the richest person to have ever walked the planet. And a lot of people, he's from Mali, and Mali's in Africa, and a lot of people don't know about his story. So just to highlight, I think it's important to know about where we come from, our history, African history. Especially Somalis in Africa, we need to know about it more. And just to highlight more about the scholarly aspect about Arabs and stuff. There's this notion that I've seen. And it's like if someone were to be like, yeah, I studied in Saudi, for example, or I studied in Egypt, for example, it's like it's considered like, okay, your thing, But if you were to be educated, like say, for example, I don't know, Timbuktu, will be like, they wouldn't even look at you twice, they'll be like, yeah, this guy, he never went to Saudi to be educated, never went to Egypt to be educated, there's this idea where the places like those, like where you're going to gain the most knowledge. Just because we pray the same way doesn't mean all the knowledge is there, like that's the one thing that we need to change our mindset. And a lot of people, they have this idea, and one thing I realized as well, obviously the Somali people, we have we're Muslims, majority of us, but also majority of us we follow a specific sort of sect or sort of school of thought. Like a lot of countries, they're Muslims, but a lot of them have different schools of thought. And with Somalis, there's this specific school of thought that a lot of people follow. And like obviously, everyone's going to sort of adopt that kind of sort of school of thought. So yeah, that's what I say. Thanks.
Yes, Sagal, do you want to go?
Oh yeah, it's not really factual. It's just about my experience, especially when I first went to travel in different parts of Africa. I remember being in Ghana and was completely shocked the fact that they had, Eid as a national holiday, and I actually found out 40% of the population is Muslim, and I think that was my own ignorance of just assuming, Islam to Somalis was kind of just like, aside from North Africa, it was kind of just like exclusive to us. And I think especially traveling on to different parts of Africa, what I just really valued, and I think I've learned as well myself to I've just really admired, is the fact that they valued their Africanness and their Blackness, as well as valuing, their being Muslims as well. So I feel like I kind of want that for us as Somalis as well, to start valuing that as well. And I don't feel we do that. And I really hope we can start working towards that. And how Mohammed just made that point of, there's so many parts of Africa that has so much Islamic history. And I just want us to kind of go forward with that and we'll start valuing our Blackness as well, hopefully in the near future, inshallah.
Thank you, Sagal. I didn't actually know that Ghana had that as a national holiday, so just found that out today.
I was shocked myself as well. I had the day off work too.
Yeah, does anyone else want to go?
I actually wanted to mention a very good example of how African Islam scholarly kind of knowledge is very much looked down upon. I've noticed actually, especially in 2020. Do you remember towards the end of Ramadan during the Eid situation when the new moon was sighted in Somalia by these I think it was 5 or 8 men, and across like Twitter was roasting Somalia for the longest time. Everyone was made fun of. They're like, oh my God, why are they pretending to see moons out here? And everyone's saying we have to wait for Saudi Arabia to tell us that the moon was there. And then later on, I found out that every country has its own kind of separate sighting of the moon. It can happen. So I didn't know that. And the whole time I just followed whatever Saudi Arabia did. I think that's pretty much an ode to how Somalis are in close proximity with Arabs as in terms of our religion, and we, like Mukhtar said, we very much uphold Arabs as the beacon of Islam. So, and we're Muslims, so we have to be closer to that, and we're comforted by that. So I think it's just, like I said, it's just the familiarity of it. But I thought that whole situation is a perfect example of African Islamic scholarly kind of knowledge being looked down upon in our context, but we always run to the Arab community to lead us in the fight or in the kind of in the understanding and knowledge of Islam, and I think that needs to change. And I think, we could really, as a community, it'd be good if we could move forward from that.
Thank you, Hannah. We've gotten a really good comment from on Facebook from a guy named Ahmed Abdi. He says, the dogma of seeing ourselves as either Black versus Arabic needs to be resolved. Also, collectively, we need to have a greater understanding of how we see ourselves, how we think others see us, and how we would like to be seen. Now, this is open to anyone. So those 3 questions, how we see ourselves, how we think others see us, and how we'd like to be seen. How can we impact those? Or what can we do about those 3?
That is, can I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the whole notion about identity, it's not a simple answer because it really is fluid in different spaces. So from an African context, how you see yourself is very different from how you see yourself in the West. And the reason for that is you're not racialized in Africa, so your identity is very strong. And I don't think there's significant confusion around that without the wider context, perhaps around religion, Islam, and Arab. I think that becomes the more bigger issue. But in the West is very different, and you have very little control over that because you're just seen as Black. And why I was saying it's quite key to hold onto that Somali identity and understand Blackness from a political perspective is quite key. And I think being quite perhaps the latest community, we're still grappling with that, trying to understand. And that will take time. It's not an easy thing because you would find that from the African Caribbean community, from other communities who have had a whole long history. When you exist within a system that consistently tries to almost remove, and that is where the system is built, dehumanizing you, it's another challenge to really try to build yourself up. And the only way you can build yourself up is by being confident in who you are and really appreciating your African heritage, your Somali heritage, and your own identity. I think that's the key, and that's the most powerful, holding on to your identity, your Muslim identity, your African, and really reconciling them. And if you have that, then that is okay, accepting yourself beyond seeing yourself through the prism of whiteness or Arabness or other things. I think we need to come back to that, to really hold on to our own identity and accepting that and being confident about that. But that's quite a hard one because we have a strong challenge as Somalis. I mean, we fight over our clan. And I don't want to even go into that. So we can't even agree within ourselves who we are. So that's a huge thing. And then to then go into the world when you're still really conflicted, when you see yourself, you're superior to this other. So it's a lot of education, but the key is being comfortable with being Somali, being African, being Black. That is the most powerful for me. And then presenting that to the world, because you have to define yourself. You have to be comfortable with yourself, and you have to hold that all of the time. And then you can present to the world, and the world will respond to that. It's not an easy one in the West, but that's the key that I can say as somebody who is in a campaigning space. Your identity is the most important.
Sada, let me ask you a quick question. For the parents that are here in the West that have young teenagers that, you know, I'm not gonna lie, at one point when I was growing up, I wasn't proud to be Black. And I think that was probably, you know, going to all white school when I was in Sweden, and, you know, just what I would hear about Black people and Africans always starving, or you're hooligans, or whatever. How would you, what advice would you give to parents in the sense of making sure that their kids are proud of the African heritage and they're confident and helping build their African identity?
I think I'd say two things, and I keep saying it's not easy, even for somebody who's campaigning for race. Walking into spaces and being Black is a challenge, and you have to really build yourself and have that network. Now, key is around heritage and identity, and really building so that children who are growing up have that notion of who they are. But also, I think as parents, understanding the context of our children and the impact of racism. And I think we're not educated enough about that. So we don't really understand. We just think all you have to do is send your child to school and that's it. And they come back. And there's a lot of things that happen at school, because that's where racism, and that's where the damage really, really happens. And we're really focused on just grades, just get the grades. But then you're not going to get the grades when you're really within that. And even when you come out of that I think so there's a lot of education that needs to happen. But we also have to admit part of our parents are not educated. That is a huge challenge too. So if you don't understand the system, and we're quite new into the system, how would you understand structural racism? And I think there's a need around organizations, there's a need around activism to really try to support and educate and support parents. I'm educated and I know that. So I can't even imagine what that would be for a parent who is not educated and doesn't understand systemic racism for what the children are going through. So there are a number of things. I think key heritage is number one, but also we need to build networks and organizations to really, really help young people understand when they're transitioning into the world, because predominantly you have young Somali growing up in, perhaps very few of them grow up in white areas, but you might end up growing in a predominantly inner city neighborhood with people like you. That is good to begin with. But then you go to university and then you go into the world. And that completely changes because you exist in a white world. What does that mean? So there's education, there is support, there are a number of things. But key is building that infrastructure. And I have hope in the younger generation emerging, because I think they're more educated around those issues. They understand, and creating this kind of platform that you're creating, we need to have more conversation. That is the only way, because it is huge and it's complex. But well done for curating this. Just continue to do this and have these conversations. That in itself is a powerful thing.
Sada, I got to ask you another question, because you just reminded me of something. You said there's few Somalis that grow up in, you know, predominantly white environments, and if you grow up in a predominantly, you know, Black Somali environment, at least that's like you have the groundwork there. You know, for this, and when those Somalis go out to the world and they're in a predominantly white environment, it might be difficult. But what I want you to imagine is the vice versa. So someone, you know, from a black Somali or whatever, growing up in a predominantly white environment, and then, you know, not having any Somali or Black friends to a certain age, and then suddenly having those friends. We do sometimes do the reversal of, you know, however that person acts, they'll be like, oh, you're so Adan, for instance, or so that in itself is almost, I don't know exactly what my question is here, but what I'm trying to say is we are Somali dabe'at, shall I say, or the way we are, we have this tendency to tease people for how they are, or their beliefs, or if it's different to what we think. And we have this thing of, we're slightly judgmental people instead of being, you know, understanding and being able to just maybe agree to disagree. How do we unlearn this? I know it's something that's deep rooted, very deep rooted, but I think it's very unfortunate that we're passing things like this on to the younger generation.
Yeah, and I think it's hugely complex because I find sometimes as Somalis, we're too critical of ourselves. And I think that is what we focus on. We're constantly self-critical. What I did in Bristol, I started the fast and I ran that for about 4 years, Somali festival in Bristol. And that just emerged from going to London and seeing Somali festival. And I thought, this is brilliant because it was beautiful. You had artists, you had writers, and it was really, really powerful to bring it to Bristol. And there was significant engagement, and it was a beautiful thing to actually have. But within those conversations in the community, we're constantly self-critical. I think we need to lift ourselves up a little bit. And sometimes it's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to have all the complexities that we have. That's why I love being Somali, because it's quite confusing. It's sometimes, I call it schizophrenic. But that's beautiful. There's nothing wrong. We don't need to be anything else. That's fine. And we have to celebrate that and not try to change that, because I don't want to change who we are. It can be quite confusing, conflicting. That in itself is the power of being Somali, where you walk into a space just because you're Somali, somebody thinks they own you. That can be quite hard, but at the same time, it's really beautiful because you're part of something, you know, for just being Somali. So I think it's celebrating that, but also understanding how do we use that as an advantage and hold that, but also understand how we navigate through the system to have the advantage within the system. Because you do need, once you get into employment, you're dealing with Adan. The ways of communicating that you have to, there's nothing wrong with that. You have to be coded where you're switching. When you're with Adan, you have to speak in this way. When you're in the community, you have to speak in this way. So we need to be more educated to make that progress, and there's nothing wrong with that. So what I'm trying to say is, it's okay to have the mess. It's okay to have the complexities, but the most important thing is the navigation. How do you navigate the system? Because the system is different. It will need you to perform differently. It will need you, how I act when I'm with Somalis, it's not the way I act when I walk into a meeting and that's just normal. So you have different ways of performing, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, Sada. I'm sure there's others here that want to speak now. Anyone want to go first?
I feel like I've spoken a lot today. Here I am again. I think, you know what, it's really, like Sada said, there's a beauty in being Somali. Being Somali is a very beautiful thing, and our community is so rich and it's cultured. And, you know, even like when Mukhtar was talking about, I can't remember if it was Mukhtar or someone else, but they're talking about being in a mosque and going to masjid and going to tarawih prayers or whatever else that you were doing. If you go to a majority Asian mosque, you do feel that isolation. You do feel that kind of sense of, maybe, do I belong here? Do I not? And there is that very visible gap that you feel. But if I go to a mosque that's majority Somali, I'm at home, I'm comfortable, I'm fine, everything's going to be okay. And I think that's really, and I want us as a community to continue holding on to that, because even though I say, as a community, we do need to step into our Blackness and understand how we fit into this Western society and how we can progress in this Western society, understanding how we fit into Blackness, we are still Somali, and we should never be able to let go. We shouldn't let go of that at all, because it's a powerful thing. We come from somewhere, and that's a big blessing. You know, if you think about people who are from the Caribbean, who are from Jamaica and African American communities, unfortunately, because of their history, they have been severed. Their ties to Africa have been very much severed. They don't know necessarily where they come from in the continent, and that is no fault of their own, of course. Whereas, alhamdulillah, we still have that tie, and I don't want us to ever let go of that, because it informs who you are as a person, and it's a powerful, beautiful thing. And I think that's what makes us as a community really like resilient as well. But in regards to our parents being more educated in how to raise kids in the West, I think that's a huge discussion all in its own, because they're not, like Sada said, our family is not perfect. We are a mess. Like across the community, we have our messy moments, but there's also going to be situations where you're going to have to also kind of come to terms with the fact that they might never be able to understand themselves as Black people, and they might never step into Blackness the way that we are as a younger generation. But you still love them. You still educate them through the system. You still help them understand what's happening and how to better ourselves as a community. But also come maybe to terms with the fact that there might never be as far as we're aware, maybe our older generation are never going to be able to identify with that wholeheartedly the way that we do. Because again, we are from a diaspora as well. That's a whole different experience, a whole different kind of understanding of how the world works. So I think keeping in mind, I think it's about context and understanding, and also kind of coming up with a compromise within ourselves as a people in general.
Thank you, Hannah. I just want to see is Yusuf still on here? Can't see him. No. Mohammed, you'll have to represent for the guys here. So I'm going to ask the question again that Ahmed Abdi asked. He said, collectively, we need to have a greater understanding of how we see ourselves, how we think others see us, how we would like to be seen. How do you think we can impact those 3 questions? What can we do about that?
I think it revolves around the Somali identity. With regards to it, there's a lot of misconceptions towards it, especially with regards to comparing with the older generation and us current one. There's a different generational view on how they see the region. There's a different generational view on the culture. There's a different generational view on the clan and tribal system. The older generation, they use their clan and tribal system for everyday life. Suddenly when the Civil War took place in 91, and they were to emigrate to the States or the UK, obviously they can't use that system, because there's already a system in place in the West. And for them, that's their sort of, it's hard to integrate. But whereas us, for me, for example, being born and raised in London, it was very hard for me to integrate, and but the problem with that is, with regards to the culture and heritage, I had to find my way. And that's the difference between those that are from the older generation. Their culture is so embedded to a point, if they were to immigrate anywhere in the world, they'll still infiltrate that culture. But for someone like me, I had to go find my own way around it. And also with regards to Islam, the older generation, they always had this idea of Islam through people. In a sense, it was this oral culture of Islam. There was no obviously there was no technology. Everyone would write in parchments. A sheikh would say, you should do this, others would follow. So the majority of their sort of Islam is through what others have told them. But for us, we have technology, we can go online, search something, and it's already there. For example, I'd have arguments with my mom, and she would say to me, this is haram. And I'll be like, oh, no, it's not. And she'd be like, yes, it is. And I'm like, but then what's your source? Hibber told me, when I was in Somalia. I'm like, no, that's not necessarily true. That can't work. I can have proof, and when I told my mom about it, she was like, wow, like her whole world changed, and I think if we were to see ourselves with us, for example, Somali is a beautiful thing, and for example, when I was there was a Somali mom. She had a baby, and she was going to the toilet, and she asked me, Somali? I said, yeah, I'm Somali. And she goes, can you hold my baby for me? And I'm thinking in my head, like, what culture in this world will allow you to baby an unknown person you've just met, just for them to go somewhere and come back? And I think that is the beauty of Somali Numud. It's like, for them to link the Somalis, it's like, yeah, you know what? I feel safe. I feel secure. I can ask him anything. He'll help me out. There's amazing, beautiful bond. And I don't think that I've seen it with any other bond. And I think, but also the problem with us is we're very prideful people. Even if we're wrong, we'll take that to the grave. There are times when I know my dad is wrong, but he will never admit that he's wrong to me. He'll just take it with him, and I'll just like, yeah, you know, Dad, it's all right. Like, no, I know your pride is overpowering that, but it's cool. And I think a lot of the older generation were like that. Um, and then I think what's detrimental with the younger generation is that with regards to, I mean, I don't want to mention this, but I feel like I have to. With regard to, like, you know, Somalia and Somaliland and things like that, you know, like there are people in the West who've never been back home, never seen back home, and they claim, you know, their tribe and their clan. They've never seen it, you know, physically. You know, it's like there's this belief that their clan will help them, but they don't even know, and they don't even know who's the leader of the clan. They don't know who's in the clan. All they know is that they're from that clan. You know, and it's like, it's just so strange. Like, so I think in terms of how we view ourselves, we view ourselves as Somali, Muslim, Black, I think we should link the beautiful, amazing concept of Somali Nimo with Blackness together. I think they should both come together. And I think our viewpoint and how Blackness should change. All this, like, you know, this bleaching that's happening with Somali girls, especially in Kenya and Somalia. I've seen, like, they literally bleach themselves to a point where being light is beautiful. And I think that needs to change, because that is literally detrimental to your health in the future. You know, you can get cancer through that. And, you know, these things, they're not. And there's this trend where, like, if, you know, the problem with Somalis is, if there's something that's going on, like a trend, like if I tell so-and-so about this, they'll be like, yeah, I'll follow that with so-and-so, and then it will just continue. And it's a bad thing. That means everyone is affected. And that has changed, because that could be so detrimental. I can go to a girl and, like, bleaching is good for you. She'll tell her friend, she'll tell her friend, and then the whole village have it.
Mohammed,
Just like,
let me ask you a quick question, because we need to come to an end soon. You went into bleaching, and, you know, people thinking, or our community somehow thinking that lighter means better. What can we do to change that mindset? What can we do to celebrate, you know, all shades of all the shades that we have in Somalia?
yeah, I think partly the blame goes to men, to be honest, because, you know, they say to the women, like light-skinned ladies, and for a woman who's dark-skinned, they're like, okay, like all men require someone who's, like, you know, like, I need to be like, how do I go about that? And there aren't any, like, makeup sort of facilities, like, as if from the West, for example, in the Horn, there's not, like, enough shades, like, complement your skin and things like that. And by the way, I have sisters, so if any of you think that I know this, because I have sisters. So with that, I think there needs to be an education, like, just because you are a certain skin, dark skin, doesn't necessarily mean you won't get a guy, or you're not beautiful or anything like that. There needs to be a shift in thinking. And I think with the older generation, is all of us, they're longer in terms of how they view Blackness. But I think how within us Somalis in the West or in the Horn, we need to change how Blackness is perceived.
So, Mohammed, because you're speaking specifically about people back home, now I don't remember, but I'm making an assumption here, which is kind of dangerous, but still. TV, what the commercials, or what people are you know, seeing on the media back home, or what's being posted. I'm assuming, you know, the people that are in Rawayats, or whether it's, you know, the Somali music videos, or the ones that are taking part of the TV shows, or the ones that get the jobs to be a news anchor, for instance, are the ones that are of a lighter shade. So would you say a simple start in our own backyard would be to try to encourage more of a diverse, you know, news, like seeing news anchors of different shades, not just the light ones?
Yes. Like, even with the Somali singers and the ones that recently, like, you know, now the shift of how television is or like media is used is completely changed. You know, it's not like universal TV anymore, and the sort of like camera quality and all of that. People have like gone so like, you know, massively improved. But I feel like those types of people, because for them they care about what others think. I can't remember who said this, but some of these are always critical. So if someone were to showcase their real shade, for example, and it's dark, you know, people just grill her. There would be so many people just taking the piss and all of that, you know. And I think for those that are like musicians and singers and all of that, they're afraid of criticism. They're afraid of the people like criticizing them and things like that. But at the end of the day, like, you're gonna get criticism everywhere. If you care about what others think, they're never gonna move on. You're just gonna stay stagnant. So
that's very true, Mohammed. Thank you for your comments. Thank you to all our panelists. Unfortunately, Mukhtar and Yusuf had to leave us. I think Saga wants to say something. I'm gonna let Hanan and Saga and Sada say something, and then we're gonna come to a finish. Yeah.
I'm just gonna quickly jump in, because I just want to quickly say that I really do feel like, from some of the like topics and what Mohammed just mentioned, some of the things that he just mentioned, and yourself as well, Amina, I do feel like this is my personal opinion, but I generally feel like we need to go and really start dissecting the anti-blackness in our Somali community. And I think it's in the simplest ways, and everyone goes through their own simple, like, you know, their journeys and stuff. And I think that hits on as well in colorism. And for me, especially with Black Lives Movement, what I've started to think more about is, you know, our experience as Black people is different to people of color. And I feel like we need to start working towards that, and start, you know, collectively thinking, seeing each other all like Black people as one, and start, you know, learning about all histories of Black culture, you know, African culture, just all of it, and start. I feel like for me, Amina will know, because Amina's known me for a very long time. I feel like I've gone through a journey of starting to, you know, really think about my Blackness, and, you know, being unapologetic about being Black. You know, I've started to, you know, a few years now, I've started to wear my hair curly, and like, for me, they're forms of activism, wearing my Blackness as proudly, as like openly as I can. And I just feel like I think we should start at home and really start challenging our community and the anti-Blackness that's rooted. And I think that would eventually roll down to like addressing colorism and so forth. So let's just start having this conversation with our families and everyone around us, and start talking about why Somalis so against, you know, marrying into other Black communities, and why are we not integrating with them? Because we do experience anti-Blackness from Asian communities, Arab communities, and I think we need to start actually accepting that and seeing us as, you know, but start valuing our Africanness as high as possible, and being unapologetically Black, because that's what we are. And I think we should just go forward with that. And I'll stop now.
Thank you, Saga. Sada, can you go next? I know you need to leave soon.
Yeah, there's nothing to add to what Saga has said. I think I feel encouraged by the conversation led by young people. I think that's really powerful. And I think that's where the change will be, but also to just hold, and I keep coming back to this, around all the madness and the messiness within the community. It's not the biggest deal. It's just trying to understand racial inequality and seeing how we can change that, so that we have better outcomes. I think all society have their own challenges, and that's always given, and sometimes probably never will change, and that is not a bad thing, I think. But to perhaps just focus on more the racial justice and racial inequality to have better outcomes. I think that's where I would put the energy, and to hold on to your Somali identity, as crazy and as messy as it is, but really encourage. I feel you're leading in the right way, you're having the right conversations, and I'm truly proud of you guys. So keep up the good work. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Sada, and thank you so much for joining us.
No problem at all. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Wait. No, you guys stay on. Sada needed to leave.
Okay.
You don't get off so easy.
I didn't even finish to say goodbye yet, guys.
I know, I still have you
My
guys.
closing statement.
I've not forgotten about you. Go on.
I think, well, Sagal and Sado and everybody put it beautifully as a whole. There is a lot of complications in our community that we need to talk about. So many, from colorism to the way that we interact and integrate into this country. There's a lot of things, or in any of our Western countries and identities, there's a lot that needs to be kind of dismantled and understood. But with that comes also patience. So do be patient with your elders and those who are in the upper, like the older region or the older generation, because it is difficult to dismantle something that you've known your whole entire life. Is very, very difficult. And to understand Somali Nimo in a different context, which is separate from the way that your children understand it, again, very, very difficult. This is not going to happen overnight. This is not going to happen quickly, but that does not mean that we don't do the work. And even with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, that movement is about uplifting Black lives. And it's about and understanding and putting a spotlight on Black issues. Those are our issues. Police brutality, that's our issue. Gang culture and gang violence within Western societies. Whenever you look at the street and for every Trayvon and Raekwon that you see, you're going to see an Abdi, you're going to see a Muhammad as well. And that needs to be discussed as well as within our community. But then in healthcare, I think we all know that every time we go to see the GP, what does our mom say? Over exaggerate the symptoms so that you can get the treatment that you want. That's another inequality. It should not have to be like that. So we're already there. We are way past, even though our experience and the way that we interact in this country is so beyond the conversation of are we Black? We're there. Like we need to get past that notion of are we Black and if we're Black or if we're not, because it's too late. Society is already seeing us like that. So we need to be able to interact and kind of work in a way that we're able to start bettering our own communities and bettering ourselves as a people. But this whole conversation has been really uplifting. It's been great. And I'm just like Saad, I'm very excited. And this year in 2020 has been wonderful to see the movement make such massive strides and massive differences, especially with the Shukri Abdi case. I'm sure you guys are all aware of that as well. That's Black Lives Matter put that into a massive, massive pedestal. We've had celebrities retweet about Shukri Abdi. Now things are actually starting to happen. This is what happens when you step into Blackness. And this is what happens when you understand that the issues that the Somali community face are institutional racism. As much as it's our individual factors, it's also institutional racism. And we need to be able to address that as a community. But yeah, I'm looking forward to how that's going to happen, and keep up with the activism, keep locked into what's going on in the news. And yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's been a privilege. It's been really good conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mohammed.
Yeah, well, Black Lives Matter is our problem, and we need to. We need to support that. We need to, because at the end of the day, it's an injustice, and at the end of the day, we should be for justice, and like that's just something that we should follow anyway. And on top of that, we're Black, so an injustice is taking place with Black people. So this is surely our fight. And like Hanan said, the Shukri case happened last year, and it was in a way sadly forgotten because the case was closed, and because of the Black Lives Matter movement, the case was reopened. Loads of people started sending emails to Andy Burham, who is the mayor of Greater Manchester, and he even went on the news saying that he got thousands of emails and he started looking into the case. So that's what happens when people come together. That's what happens when people come together for a specific cause, and justice to take place. Rallying together. And I think with regards to the Black Lives Matter movement, is such a beautiful movement. And unfortunately, the reason why is because it's been given this highlight is because someone had to die for 8 minutes painfully on the floor. But at the end of the day, now that the movement has been, like pretty much not even nationwide, it's gone international now. Movements that have been taking place in not just in America, but in various places, Europe, in Australia, as far as Australia, and alhamdulillah, that's a beautiful thing. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but I'm just going to end it there. But with regards to the civil rights movement, the ones that happened in the state, that is the biggest civil rights movement ever to be put on this book now at this present moment. It's the biggest one in the world, and it's very important to be on the right side of history with this. And I think what we're doing is we're on the right side, and inshallah, justice will prevail for George Floyd. Justice will prevail for all the black people that have died through just going to the shop, being shot in the car, being killed just by jogging, and things like that. So yeah, inshallah.
I just want to say
one point, Ahmed, I'm so sorry. I was just
fine. I know you suck.
I know I talk a lot. I'm just going to say I've never felt so much pride to see Somali people, especially in Minnesota. And, you know, I went to the protest last week as well myself, and I saw so many people, so many Somali people or people there at the forefront. And I've never felt so much pride. So at least that's a positive note. And I just want to say to everyone, don't forget to take care of yourself, because I feel like for me, I've taken some time off days, you know, off social media, because it's been so draining and it's a difficult time for us. So, you know, we can jump in and out, and then with our forms of activism. And I'm going to stop there. I'm sorry.
No, that's very true, Saga. It's very important to take care of ourselves. I just want to say thank you so much for taking part, you guys, today. And to the ones that are watching and the ones that will be watching, please, if you haven't already, go to change.org and sign Shukri Abdi's petition if you haven't already. It says we're few signatures away from reaching the, was it 1,000? It's a high number, but yeah, I'm not great with numbers, but but go and sign it if you haven't signed it, please. And that's it. Bye, guys.
See you later. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Pleasure to meet you guys.
Bye, guys.